Hey everybody, today I'm going to be reviewing The Third Man. This film came out in 1949. It was directed by Carol Reed. I said this quite recently on my channel, I can't even remember which video, but I talked about how The Third Man is one of my favorite movies and certainly one of my favorite films of the film noir genre. It is one of those examples of just a happy miracle, everything coming together really in perfect harmony. It is very clever, it is crisp, it's quite structured in a lot of ways, yet there is a real vim and vigor about it. There's a very present sort of tone. It's very in the moment, it feels. And for me, when I first saw the film, I liked it for sure. I was intrigued by it, but I wasn't in love with it. But the more that I watch it, the more I find myself just smitten with it. And just the more I mature, the more that I appreciate it. There are so many examples of film noir, and this one somehow sets itself apart. Film noir is naturally a very cynical genre, and it is full of very specific archetypes, and they all stand for something that is darker, more brooding, just kind of a more bitter reflection of life after World War II, which usually means a lot of corruption, a lot of seediness, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of tragedy. And I always try to figure out what it is about this film that I think really sets itself apart. In part, I think it is because, we get a different perspective. We get the perspective from across the pond of post-war, which of course is very different than American perspective, despite both using those similar tropes of the genre. But this one is just, I think, particularly compelling. But I think more than anything, it's the tone of the film. It is quite a unique tone. There's certainly an elegance and a rhythm to everything, especially to the dialogue. And there's just an easiness, like a charm about everything, as you might expect, because it is film noir, but it's always undercut with something sharp, something, just kind of a sourness that tinges everything, even aesthetically and represented through mood. And I like how it feels, at least on the surface, and very intentionally surfacey. It's trying to feel very like pulpy, American pulp fiction. You've got Joseph Cotton here, he is playing a writer of very cheap Western novelettes. He's kind of washed up. He drinks a lot, but he finds himself in the center of a very melodramatic situation that is fit for a novelette, for one of those dollar books, matinee movie or something. But yeah, it is still just the look of everything, the feel of everything is naturally very European. It's very expressionistic in terms of the style and just really off kilter, especially with a lot of the Dutch angles. Everything's just a little bit at a tilt. Very bizarre, but there's something very cheeky about everything as well. I think there's a lot of humor in this movie, and it's one of those things where, again, with multiple viewings, you really get a sense of that humor because it is subtle. But it gives us this feeling of everything is just a little bit off, everything is a little bit off balanced, never quite settled, and just really angular. I really enjoy the side characters, just the little bit parts here and there. They give just this little sparks of theater throughout the film. Just give everything a little bit of color. Everybody is interesting, even if someone has no dialogue. Just so much is in the face. There's always something unique here going on tonally in every single scene. And I'm just very drawn to that. There's something about this film, maybe not to any sort of overt degree or anything like that, but it feels like some sort of old funhouse, or almost has like a Fellini-esque, just a touch of Fellini humor. And there's just something about this film that to me feels more stark in contrast to a lot of the other movies in the film noir genre of the time. Again, it is that European point of view, and you can just feel it, you can smell it, just practically, in the style of everything. It's just this feeling of, times have changed. There's a lot of chaos, and this is like the clearing after the storm, but in that, there are a lot of ghosts that are kind of always haunting the streets at night. Always these dark shadows, and what is lurking in them always. There's always just this sense of paranoia, and always being alert, and this feeling of everything being kind of seedy and underground. All the dealings, the racketeering, the desperation for people to, find a way to make money after the world has been shaken up to such a degree. To me, Harry Lime is that great symbol in a way for the war. He's somebody that may have been human at a certain point, but we never get a sense of that. He always just seems, at least in terms of how he's discussed in this movie, how he's portrayed, more of like a very mythological sort of figure. A dark representation of post-war Europe and a more cynical morale that's naturally going to go along with that. But to me, when I watch the film, Harry he's so magnetic in the movie that you just can't imagine him being any different from how he is constantly described in the movie, how they build him up throughout the story. You sense that he was always kind of a rascal, always meant to be somebody who likely was going to have a dark fate. And then you have Joseph Cotton, by contrast, who is you know, as I said, playing the protagonist, the hero there. And he is very unremarkable. He's a character who is meant to be uninspiring, perhaps very dry, a blank slate for us to kind of be able to ride on the back of throughout the movie. He also represents a facet of that, you know, like a similar post-war sort of cynicism, but in a more salvageable way. But I love Joseph Cotten, and I really like him in this movie because I think it's a really hard thing to be able to play somebody who's meant to be unremarkable. That's a hard thing for an actor to do, because with Joseph Cotten, I think he can play unremarkable without being boring, without being somebody that is flat. And he's playing somebody here who is not particularly clever, but he's not like, you know, completely oafish. He's not playing him totally over the top, comedic stupid. And he so easily could have done that. But no, I really appreciate that he has a very invisible technique going on. And I think those kinds of actors tend to be a little bit underrated. Joseph Cotten is maybe a little bit more underrated. He isn't remembered like, you know, other actors who have a similar invisible technique, like a Gary Cooper as an example, but I tend to prefer Joseph Cotten. And it's easy to see why Orson Welles liked him and why they work together so well. They have an excellent sort of chemistry there. Cotten being the straight man to Welles being just this dominant force, this charismatic presence. Alida Valli is also very good here as the femme fatale, and I think she really has a great instinct for playing melancholy, and she really understands the depth of this woman without ever having to feed it to us in an obvious way. She really masters that mysterious, very elusive quality that the femme fatale kind of must have in movies. But I also think, you know, it's just her emotional depth. You know, you always get this sense that she is completely in another world, another universe than the rest of these characters, and they're not ever going to be able to reach her. And the feeling that she carries throughout the movie, I think, is just the feeling, there's this dark feeling throughout the movie, you know, that she's not particularly interested in adjusting her wavelength so that she can be understood or that she can connect to anybody else. But that's kind of interesting, I think. I like that, you know, when you have these two main characters, you have Alida Valli here and you have Joseph Cotten. I like that the two characters remain platonic. I think it's quite refreshing, because normally it would be more this love triangle, and that would be a big focus, a focal point of the climax. Whereas this feels like a different point of view. This is a triangle for sure that's going on here, but it's one that is kind of sad and withered. It's like an abandoned building or like an empty shell that might have once had life, but now all you have left are the memories. I do feel a sort of sympathy for these characters, even though I probably shouldn't. But, you know, just knowing that the world is a very different place than it used to be. And, you know, that takes time to realize, and people do change throughout that. And unfortunately, sometimes we do have those burdens of no longer being able to reach somebody that we once loved or what we once knew. And I don't know, I just feel like it really captured the feeling of the world at the time, or Europe in particular. I just get this sense throughout the movie that there is a longing for something to be very vivid and very alive. And yet there just isn't. And part of that, you know, again, it's a beautiful place for the film to take place. You know, Vienna, the old architecture, the echoes of the steps that you hear, the old statues, the dark shadows. It looks like a place that once really thrived, but yet again, there is no true desire to move on. You know you have to, but mentally, it doesn't seem like anyone is ready. And that brooding feeling of everything is, you know, what I think, not being able to escape that, the characters not being able to escape that feeling, and that intoxication, I think is one of the most compelling things about film noir. Now, when I do talk about that, I'm making this movie seem like it's really dark and really morbid. And I mean, yeah, it does have a tone of that for sure, but it's not completely. It is really funny, as I said. It might have a bitterness and a darkness to it, but it is also at the same time quite zippy and quite punchy. It's peppered with all kinds of very unique twists and turns, and it really does capture the spirit of Harry Lime, just the personality, without ever truly giving into the villainy full on. And I'm talking about the movie itself. Harry Lime, though, is the point. I mean, he is the crux of the tension. It is not a love story. It's not anything like that. He is the thing that has to click. He has to make the film work, and he makes every storyline converge at the same time in the end. So it's like, you know, he's got to be great. And the way that they talk about him, it's like, well, you know, once he comes on screen, he better live up to all the hype. And he does, I mean, in just the most spectacular way. That character entrance, we all know it's one of the most iconic of all time, but it's just that light just coming in right at the right time, or just like a blink, and all of a sudden he's there. It is perfect. It's the timing of it. It's just so sudden and so brilliant. And then You know, I think it's something about Orson Welles, that smirk and that boyish face that he has. It gives me chills every time. It makes me smile. And then how you also have in the background, just very softly, that jaunty zither score that is playing the Harry Lime theme. No one could have played this but Welles. I cannot imagine anybody else. I know they had people like Cary Grant in talks for the character, but no, it's just nobody has this kind of presence. Not only is this one of my favorite villains of all time, but honestly, it might be just one of my favorite characters of all time. I mean, he's just extraordinary. The scene where he is introduced, and I mean in the sense where he finally gets to speak, is the scene between, you know, Welles and Joseph Cotten on the Ferris wheel. It is utterly thrilling. I think it is one of the most perfectly written scenes I have ever seen. And you get a perfect sense of everything. Everything that you could want to be covered is covered. You get a perfect sense of who Harry Lime is from pretty much every angle. So no stone is left unturned. And it is always very unsettling, very unbalanced naturally because of, you know, being on the Ferris wheel. And there's that sense of danger constantly, but always there is a twinkle in the eye. Harry Lime might be a terrible person, but just, you know, as a performer, you can't help but want to follow Orson Welles. He is just so interesting, so reassuring as a performer, and you can't help but be drawn to that sense of confidence, that effortless ability to be so duplicitous. And for me, honestly, there's a lot of Orson Welles performances that I like, but this might be one of my favorites just because I think he strikes the perfect balance. Then you have the music here, which to me kind of echoes his presence throughout. Even though the Harry Lime may not be on screen that much, you always get a sense that he's always there in the shadows, and a lot of that comes through the music. When I was younger, the first time I saw this movie, I was a teenager. I hated the music so much. I cannot even tell you how much it annoyed me. It just felt very shrill, and I wanted it to end. And it's so strange. This is one of those examples where I couldn't feel more opposite. Now, I think it's one of those things where you kind of do need to get used to it. It is very different, and it's a gamble for sure, but I think it was a very creative, very bold choice, and it just infuses the film with personality. There's just that prickly sharpness to the instrument naturally, just in the timbre of it, that always makes you feel unsettled and just off balance, always alert. And yet it's very jaunty. That smugness to everything is appealing. The zither does feel just like a character on its own. And most scores at the time, you know, tended to be very orchestral. They all kind of had the same quality. But there are so many things about this film that I think are different and that feel very modern. As I've mentioned, of course, the aesthetic, the cinematography is some of the most stunning, I swear to God. And then you have that big climactic sequence at the end, you know, the chase through the sewers. And I love it. I think it's extremely modern and a lot of work went into it. Every single shot, I swear, is a money shot. Every moment is thrilling. And I love that throughout it, for the most part, until the very end, there is no score. So all you hear is just the yelling and the echoes and the steps. The sound design is on point, everything. You know, it just feels like the perfect climax, the perfect chase. There's just so much about this film that I think is special. And yes, you know, I do admit I was one of those people who maybe more appreciated it more than I really loved it. And then the more that I watched it, the more I found myself really getting attached to it on a deeper level. There's just something about that uncertainty and that reluctance to face new stages, new beginnings, grim realities, I think is a really, really painful one. And you sense it through everything, through silences, through aesthetic, you know, just the images of like Harry Lime and those fingers coming through, you know, from the sewers, I think is just a really a dark image. And the most gorgeous one is that famous shot at the end, you know, where Alida Valli is coming towards the screen and then she passes by Joseph Cotten. It's, you know, just a gorgeous, gorgeous shot. Never is the film one note. It's always hitting all kinds of different notes, all kinds of tones. Always does it carry that playful sort of jolly quality throughout. There's very present and honest filmmaking here, yet it does feel so focused. And I love just that ability to be right on the edge. That is what makes greatness. So yes, if you have not seen The Third Man, I highly recommend it if you're a fan of film noir, if you're a fan of classic cinema, because it doesn't get much better than that. But that is my review. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to go ahead and plug my website. It is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist and I do commission portraits and I sell prints of my work. If that's something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below. I'd also like to give a shout out to my Patreon supporters. Thank you guys so much for all that you do. If you are interested in becoming a patron, the link to support that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.